Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Jacquelyn E, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Deva, Our Relationship with the Subtle World. A widely traveled New Zealander, Jacquelyn is an artist and educator who has been involved in a broad range of metaphysical studies for nearly 50 years. She's the author and illustrator of The Children of Gaia and scribe of This World of Echoes. So let's welcome to the show, Jacquelyn E.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on Moments, Marianne. It's a pleasure.
Oh my goodness, what a delight it is to have you here and an honor. Once I picked this book, I could not put it down. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Oh gosh, that is goes back a long way, really. In the 2006, 2007, I was spending quite a lot of time in Scotland on a farm with friends, and we were all into the same kind of stuff. And the farmer kept telling me that I should be writing a book on Deva. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay, maybe. He'd been on at me for some time about it. So I did. I started then, 2006, 2007, wrote quite a lot. But it was coming out very academic, and I thought, I'm just not getting how to actually do this because it is such a vast topic. So I put it away for 10 years, believe it or not. And every now and again I'd go back, look at what I'd written already, think about it, and sort of mull it over, how do I approach it so that it's comprehensible to people, but it's still on track with the background metaphysics. And eventually in 2017, I just knew I'd figured out the key. So that's what I did. 2017, 2018, I wrote full-time pretty much. And there we are. It's finished, and here we are.
Well, I couldn't think of a more perfect time for this book to be out than now, because we have so many people that are exploring other worlds, the outside world. Maybe they've never really had the opportunity to do that. You talk about Deva. What exactly is Deva?
That's really the crux of the matter. In folklore, we all know about faeries and nature spirits and this kind of thing. And that's a field that's been wildly distorted by movies, and we have Disney kind of characters with fairies fluttering around in little pink dresses as if they're miniature humans. But the reality is that kingdom of the nature spirits, etc., is actually just one window on the intelligence and matter. Now, that can often turn people off because they think of all the religious arguments, etc. So let's just put that all aside. But Deva is a Sanskrit word from the ancient Sanskrit language of India, and it means being of light. And it's a really useful concept for us in the West. Now, I want to reference here your wonderful interview with Tyson Yunga Porter recently on his take as an Aboriginal Australian. And he talked about how divorced we are from the reality and the integration of nature with our psyche, as it were. And I agree wholeheartedly with what he said. The problem for us is that our Western mind is accustomed to separating things into categories. And that's been particularly emphasized during the Piscean era, where we divided religion into sects and, everybody had different takes on everything. And that's fine, but it's now we're now moving into the Aquarian age, and we need to actually have ways to integrate all these separated thinking that we've got. So Deva is a really useful way to do this, because it includes the nature spirits and their overlighting supervisors, as it were. It's let me see, how can I describe that? So the nature spirits are around about halfway up that kingdom, and below them you've got the intelligence within the cells of plants, within the atoms, and right down into the elemental, into the elements themselves. And because if these elements and if the cells, etc., if they didn't have intelligence, they wouldn't know how to do what they do. Okay, that's a given. And then as we go up, we have a hierarchy of, just like in our body, our cells have their own intelligence, and the organs have, if you like, an oversight intelligence, and the systems within the body have a higher oversight again, because they're running different ways, different systems within the body. And it's the same in nature. So the nature spirits are working at one level, but they have their own supervisory intelligence. And that's what's generally called Deva, is that supervisory level. But actually the entire kingdom is called Deva. So in nature, it's relatively easy to explain, because we can understand that trees have species. So there's a Deva of tree species, etc. And then we get on to the bigger Deva, which are Deva of ecosystems, river systems, perhaps, pieces of land on the Scottish farm. I found that there were Deva of particular crops and landscapes. And then you go on up to the really big beings of weather systems, and what we call planetary Deva. So that's just in nature. But then if we think about the fact that we're talking about the intelligence infused into matter here, then we're also talking about the intelligence within our body. We're talking about the intelligence everywhere there is matter. So as you can imagine, this opens up a huge field. And the fact that we can communicate, you'd be surprised how many people are able to communicate with the intelligence within nature that we call nature spirits, fairies, etc., and the higher overlighting Deva. We can communicate with them. So why can't we communicate or recognize Deva in other parts of life? For example, our houses. And lots of people actually kind of treat their houses as an entity. And in her lovely book about the Japanese art of tidying up, Marie Kondo talks about this, how she greets her house, and she says goodbye to her house if she's leaving, greets it when she's coming home. And that's because the Japanese traditional religion is Shinto, which also believes that there is intelligent, responsive intelligence in everything, including their houses, including the trees. So yeah, this is not a unique thing. All I've done is to find ways to put it together for people in the West who perhaps we don't have that background, as Tyson was saying. We don't have this background of being connected to them all the time. So my challenge was to actually find a way to do that.
Well, you've done it brilliantly. I mean, I have to say, I loved how you had everything interwoven in this book, and it made it really simple. Of course, I love, the energies of the Deva that you talk about. You also talk about that can be angelic as well. And I think a lot of times if people think Deva, they're thinking, oh, fairies, gnomes, those kind of nature spirits. They don't think it's the angelic as well.
Yeah, well, the whole kingdom, it's a good point, Marianne, because the kingdom in the West is referred to as the angelic kingdom. And I'm always kind of amused because sometimes you'll get people who are, very strongly religious, particularly in Christianity, who will sort of back off when you start talking about nature spirits. But actually, the angels of religion are part of the Deva Kingdom as well. They're just particular angelic entities that our religious traditions have decided to, include. But actually, the whole Deva Kingdom is the angelic kingdom. So, yes, good point.
Well, there are so many deeply spiritual people in both Ireland and Scotland, and I'm sure also in New Zealand.
Yes.
It doesn't take away anything from that belief system
No,
of Deva as well. It's just in
no,
addition to.
that's right. That's right. But we tend to box things. We put them in little boxes, and it's time to open those boxes up and join up the dots. and, and that's definitely what we've been trying to do with this book. Yeah.
Well, it's a much more magical life when you can look at it that way. When
Yeah.
you're having these deep relationships with nature in many different capacities. In your book, you talk about sensing fairy. And I know there are a lot of people out there, that they have classes where you can build fairy houses and, really kind of commune with nature in a deeper way. Is if someone's wanting to be able to sense fairies around them, what were some things that you would suggest for them?
Yeah. This is always the question, isn't it? How do I do it? How do I meet a fairy? How do I see them? And there's quite a lot of that in the book, and I've put some stuff on my website about that too. And my website, by the way, it's got my name there, but the other name I have for my website is Tall Pixie, and tallpixie.com. And so that's much easier for people to remember than how to spell my name. So they can have a look on there and get some clues. But the thing is, and in the book I call it listening to the whispers. I think, you've got to kind of shut off the phone, get away from all the technology. Even I, with all my experience, find that when I'm spending a lot of time on the computer, it's very much harder for me to switch off and, go connect with that kingdom. So perhaps, if you live in a city, find the nearest park. If you're in New York, go to Central Park. The vibe there is just lovely. And if you're lucky enough to be surrounded by nature and have trees, etc., where you live, just go sit at the bottom of a tree. And in a way, for me, in a physical sense, it's about sensitizing your entire body so that your skin is aware of what's going on around it, so that you're one of the practices I think that's actually quite helpful in this is Qigong. And there are lots of versions of Qigong, but the purest versions are basically standing still and using the palms of your hands and your skin generally to actually absorb the vibration of what's around you, coming up from the earth, coming down from the sky. So it's very much, for me anyway, it's very much a matter of sensitizing my body, because, our body is made of matter. But we're not just our body, we're also our emotions, and we're our mind, our mental body. And at all these levels, we can tune into the intelligence that is around us through our bodies, through our emotions, through our minds. And it's like expanding those senses from you to the outside world, and not in the sense of, if you're standing in front of a tree or sitting in front of a tree and wanting to connect, it's not a matter of pushing in and say, hey there, I want to talk to you. It's a matter of going halfway, because, think about it when we're talking to other people, when we're talking to strangers, there's a kind of social distance that's a bad term perhaps at the moment, but we have to allow the people that we're talking to a little bit of space. And it's the same with the nature spirits. You make the approach, but then you let them come to you, and don't ever be hung up on thinking that you must be able to see them. Even Dorothy McLean, who was a founder of the Findhorn community in Scotland, and anything in the Findhorn pantheon, and they're the book publishers of my book, Findhorn Press. She said, and she died very, very recently at the age of about 102, even she said, I don't see them. She could communicate with them, but she didn't visually see them. It is not necessary to see them to know that they're there and to communicate with them.
Well, there are lots of different ways to, and I'm doing like air quotes, see. So you can sense that spirits are near. You can have those kind of communications. Not always do things need to be seen with our eyes, because it ends up being kind of a pretty, not a very reliable way of retaining information of the world around us. That's
right. It's right. It's actually far more impactful when we're using what we call our subtle body, and the word subtle is the subtitle of the book. Our relationship with the subtle world. We actually live far more on the subtle planes than we realize. Some people are very sort of concrete and kind of engineer-like. They've got to have solidity, but actually, our emotions are subtle matter. Our thoughts are subtle matter, and we need different levels of consciousness to access these layers, if you like, of reality. But we do it all the time, even though we don't think of emotions as a subtle matter, but they are. We can actually, when you think about it, we can feel other people's emotions. You can feel strong emotion emanating from somebody, can't you? Whether it's anger or whether it's joy, you can actually feel it. Well, you couldn't feel it if it wasn't matter of some form of density. And even though it's not dense like solid, liquid, or gas, it's still a kind of matter. It's just subtle matter. Yeah.
And that's so true. I mean, I know a lot of times when you go out, if you feel like people are stressed or anxious, you can feel that. And it's palpable, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So, we exist in these different planes of being all the time. And the spiritual journey really is about becoming consciously aware of all these different planes, and then realizing that there are more planes above even the mental plane, that we call it above because they're finer levels of density. They're still part of the huge, what we call in metaphysics, the cosmic physical plane, but they're just more and more subtle forms of matter. And that the other thing about Deva, which you will have noticed in the book, is that when we're creating things, when we're building computers, when we're designing cars, when we make a piece of artwork, we're using matter, and we're also using our own personal subtle matter as input. And it makes a big difference as to what the outcome is, depending on what level of consciousness we are creating from. And that's reflected in how things work and in the quality of things that we create. So there's a section in the book contributed by a lovely lady I know who's actually an American originally. She's an architectural designer, and she contributed. She was one of my beta readers, and she came back to me with a diagram, which is in the book. I included it after speaking with her, and she shows in this diagram how ideas filter down. Ideas can filter down even from the soul level down into our consciousness, and then our challenge is, how do we actually get those ideas into reality and keep the integrity of them when we bring them down into dense materiality? And that is actually all about, how we are using those elemental forces and those Devic forces at every level of everything that we do. So it's got very practical applications as well.
So when we really connect with Deva forces and work on that relationship, is that something that can basically help them and us to evolve at the same time?
Yes, particularly in terms of our own mastery of our emotional body. When we're out of control, and we all get out of control sometimes, whether it's fear or anger or overblown emotion, in whatever way it comes out, it's not us. It's our elementals are running the show. So the emotional elementals that we're using, that emotional matter is infused with elemental life. So when we're out of control in terms of our emotional body, it's them that we're letting be in charge, not us. We're not saying, hey, hang on a minute, this is unnecessary emotion, I'm losing it here. We actually say that phrase, I'm losing it. Often our language reflects what's actually going on inside of us. And we're not, the people that I admire tremendously are those people who can be compassionate and empathetic, but they don't lose their cool. They don't lose their tempers. They don't go off the gold standard, and they retain rationality, but they don't lose that compassion and humanity. And that's where most of us are trying to get to at this stage. I mean, and then there's a whole mental level above that, which most of humanity is not really at yet. I mean, we use our mental body, but not nearly as we will in the future. But yes, we all need to get control of those elementals that we're using. It's a big challenge.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, it's a big challenge for people just to get grounded, and, and that's something that, normally we would be so in tune with. But I mean, you're so right. I mean, we're just so divorced from the natural landscape. And I think what this time in our human history has done is allowed people basically maybe the opportunity, or maybe has kind of forced them in many ways to get outside and be more connected with nature than they ever have before.
Yes. I was really lucky because I grew up, my parents' house was next to a playing field, and it was surrounded by sort of parkland hills, because it's a hilly city where I grew up. And, there were lots of trees. There was a pine forest. there was a stream, and then when I was during my childhood, I spent a few years with my parents in Western Samoa. So that was tropical jungle, beaches, palm trees, etc. And I've just always been very lucky to be able to travel and experience lots of forests and spaces like that all around the world. And of course, New Zealand's full of beautiful nature, the ones that we haven't ruined with imported species, but we still have loads and loads of wonderful nature here. And I'm very aware that, some people unfortunately don't have that experience of being able to be in nature. But even in cities, you often have trees on city streets. And David Haskell wrote a wonderful book called The Songs of Trees, and in it he describes how the trees in New York City that you often find in the streets, how they create magnets for people to meet, and they give people some kind of connection with nature and give them a sense of community that when there are no trees, people find that more difficult to get.
Oh, I can understand that. I've known many friends that have lived in concrete jungles, where they basically, their skyscraper is actually blocked by another one, so they get artificial end of the day. And, it's tough, being there. You have to really be able to find ways to connect with nature in very unique and purposeful ways.
Yeah, but don't forget too, they can also tune into what is the Davic character of the building, because as a collective, we create these we create Davic entities just by gathering together and pooling our emotions and thoughts. And so, buildings very definite, and organizations is another one. Organizations get to have like specific Deva, often in metaphysics and in groups of people who are studying metaphysics or meditating a lot. One of the things that they're doing and concentrating on is creating what they call a group soul of the group. And that's basically a Davic entity that is like the sum total of the quality, and I think this word's really important, the quality of their thoughts and their contribution to that meditation group. And every building that we're in, every organization that we belong to, we are contributing to that overall quality of energy of that group. And that's another form of Deva. It's an intelligence that becomes quasi-independent of the people that are involved in the group.
Well, I like how your book really outlines for people, gives them lots of resources. So let's say that there isn't a meditative group within the building or area that they're in, they can create one themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And, it's a pity that children often start out with this sense of connection, and but they lose it during socialization. And so if kids start telling you that they've seen a fairy, don't say it's nonsense. Encourage it. And also, help them to be in tune with, well, they are in tune anyway. Kids are like sponges. They pick up the vibes that are around them. And I think it's probably healthy if we encourage or allow them to actually talk about what it is they're picking up and how they feel, to sensitize them to, what is actually going on around them in that subtle matter that we're all immersed in all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, too often they have that turned off for them, that connection where all the miracles and magic happen, so it's nice to be able to teach adults how to cultivate that in their children. If it's something that's happening, hey, don't shut it down, cultivate it.
That's right. Yes, we've got a long way to go, but I think we can kind of sense changes on the way, and that's the positive side of having darkness sort of slammed in our faces, that it makes us appreciate the light.
In your book, you talk about, I mean, you brought it up a little bit ago, and I'd love to just kind of dive into this a little bit here. You talk about sound, and you have a whole chapter in your book on sound.
Yes.
The earth makes its own sound. And I found that fascinating when I was reading that in your book. I'd love for you to share with our listeners what that's all about and where does that come from?
Okay, well, everything vibrates. So everything has sound. I've made a book trailer video on YouTube. If you look up Tall Pixie on YouTube, you'll find it. It's only a minute long, but it emphasizes the whole sound thing. So everything's vibrating, and where you've got, even atoms that are not actually solid, they're energy vibrating. Okay, so everything is singing, and I've had the experience of being in forests where I can hear the Deva song of the forest, and it's quite something. But anyway, getting back to the earth itself, the earth is a big body in space, isn't it? So, and we need to also think of the earth as a now, who was it? His name's gone out of my head. The guy, James Lovelock. He wrote a book called Gaia, just called Gaia, and his hypothesis was, as a scientist, that the earth is a organism in its own right. So you've got this big body in space, and it's vibrating, and the scientists have actually discovered that it makes a sound because it's vibrating. And this goes right back to Plato. Plato, talked about the sounds of the spheres in the world, the planets and the stars, etc., making a sound. And so science has actually proven that the earth is making its own sound. And I mean, I kind of knew that long before they actually said so. It just makes sense. So the earth is sending out sound. Everything is sending out sound. Now, I mean, we can talk for hours on sound and what that actually means. And my husband and I, when we were at university, used to have this argument about sound, and the question in philosophy was, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no person there to hear it, is there any sound? And,
That's a long time argument, right?
The long time argument, yeah. I think we agreed to differ on it. I maintained there was, he maintained there wasn't. And I still maintain there is, because the vibration is still there. Now, of course, what it depends on is, how do we define sound? Do we define it as the vibration that's being set off, or do we define it as something that is only manifest when there is a receptive ear, as it were? So we'll leave that one open. Viewers, listeners can make their own minds up on that one.
Yeah, yes. I might have to throw my hat in the ring with you on that one too, because because you have to think about it. If everything's vibration, and just because there's no one there to hear it, doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't make a sound. You know what I mean? So yeah. And I know there's lots of thoughts that they would differ with that. So
yeah, well, university students, and particularly in philosophy, love those kinds of conundrums.
That'll keep them busy for days. Well, yes. And yeah, I know you talk about how we can, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, and what are some suggestions if people just want to go outside and just try to communicate with trees and plants, around them?
Okay, well, a lot of people have got pot plants. Pot plants are interesting. Sometimes you can get a response from pot plants. I've got a device called it's a thing that it's called the music of the plants, and you can put it's like a probe that goes down into the soil, and then you clip a metal piece joined onto that by cable onto a leaf, and that the signals from the leaf, between the leaves and the roots, goes through a device which turns it into musical notes. So the plant, you can hear the plant singing, as it were. Okay. And so, you can use that on pot plants. As far as connecting with Deva of pot plants, it's not quite so easy, because you're not going to get, unless you've got a whole mass of them, you're not going to get an overlighting Deva. You've just got the little intelligence of that particular plant. One of the things that you can do if you've got any kind of plants in the garden is when you often need to prune your plants. So what I do is I make sure I warn them before I'm going to do any pruning. And I just tune into the plant and I wait. I tell them mind to mind, as it were, I have to do this pruning. This is why I have to do this pruning. And would you please take your energy away from your leaves and your branches and go hide in the roots for a while? And I've done this for many, many years. But recently, it's been discovered by foresters and botanists that actually they now think that the roots are what they call the brains of the plant. So although that was a spontaneous thing for me, that the instinct was to say, withdraw into your roots, it actually is being proved by science that that is where the brains of the plant are, if we can think of it that way. So, and I just wait for, it doesn't take long, but I always get this sense of response that yes, they've withdrawn their energy into the roots and I can go ahead and prune.
I love that example and how much you just really trust your intuition. I think it's a good example for people starting as well. In your book, you talk about this, this walk that you took among cottonwoods and just how that was. And I'd love for you to share that with our listeners.
Oh, yeah. It was in a park in the city, nearest city to where we're living now. And it was on a steep hillside, and it was winter time, so the cottonwoods were all bare and, the leaves were all dried up on the ground. And I walked past this group of cottonwoods and I just sort of thought, oh, they're nice. And then when I got away from them, I noticed there was another path turning off that I hadn't seen before. So I took that path that was lower down. And it took me back through another part of this little cottonwood forest. And I thought, okay, there's a message here. And as you say, you've got to develop your intuition, and you've got to trust your intuition. It's really, really important that you would trust yourself. So I went and sat down amongst these cottonwoods, and they were just so beautiful, so serene, and they weren't terribly old. They certainly weren't mature cottonwoods, but they had this lovely, lovely sense of community about them and serenity about them. And I don't know how long I sat there. I mean, time disappears. I've often done trips with like-minded friends and in other parts of the world, or here in New Zealand. And when you're communing with Deva, don't be on a schedule, because you can find that time just disappears and you don't know where it's gone. And this is where a lot of these stories from old fairy tales come from. When I was growing up, there were lots of tales in books about, like Rip Van Winkle, who went, was captured by the fairies, and when he woke up, went to sleep, and when he woke up, it was 100 years later or 20 years later or whatever the heck it was. It does, and I think that what those stories are conveying is the fact that when your mind goes out and actually communes with nature, and I suspect that this is part of what Tyson Yunkaporta was talking about, is there is no sense of time. There is no sense of, having to do this, having to do that. It's an immersion. And this immersion has got a term these days called pan-consciousness. It's this idea that everything's interconnected. And somehow, as Westerners, we got to find this bridge. And I think Deva, or for me, and it's not the only way, but for me, Deva is the way to do this, is to make this bridge between our very separated thinking, and that what a lot of the Indigenous people had, and many still have, of being connected to whatever's around them, so that you actually lose your sense of boundary and everything is connected. And you certainly, when you start being able to connect with Deva, you do lose your boundaries. You lose that those separations between you and the world around you and the trees around you, etc. Immersion's the only word I can think to describe it accurately.
Well, really everything comes together, and it's easy to see why time gets so lost during that experience,
Yeah, because you step out of linear time. Because what is that sense of time? That sense of time is, this is changing, right? We get our sense of time because we see or experience change of some kind. But when we take away the change and we just go into a present, as you do in a good meditation, 20 minutes, half an hour can disappear, no trouble at all, because we're not tracking change. Whereas normally we're addicted to tracking change. We watch movies all the time, and movies are about tracking change. Drama is about tracking change. Without the change, we don't have drama, do we? So, yeah, somehow it's a different experience of life, and somehow there are many ways in which we can do it. These are just some of the ways.
So what do you want readers to take away from your book?
That when we begin to realize what the Deva Kingdom is, and how it's actually the other half of us, because we are, if you like, spiritual beings down here using matter. And Deva is infused into matter at every level of density. So they are a way, and a very important way, that we can understand both our connection with everything else and our responsibility to what we create and how we use that matter, whether it's with our bodies or outside of us and creating things in the world. Yeah, it's about a Western way to come to that point of understanding the interconnections between everything.
Oh, what a beautiful place to be, my goodness. Well, Jacquelyn, why don't you give us your website one more time for our listeners so they know how to connect with you and learn more about your books and be part of your community?
Thank you. Well, as I said, the easiest one to remember is tallpixie.com. And that connects in. You won't see Tall Pixie when you link into it. When you finally get to it, it'll have jacquelynnelane.com. But it doesn't matter. Tall Pixie will get you there. And their YouTube channel is also called Tall Pixie. And Tall Pixie is a pixie. She's sitting on the words Tall Pixie and she's reading a book. Unlike me, she's got very long legs.
Well, Jacquelyn, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope you all stay safe over there in the USA and anywhere else in the world.
Well, thank you, Jacquelyn. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Deva, Our Relationship with the Subtle World. If you'd like to connect with Jacquelyn, you can at jacquelynelane.com for more information. Deva is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers, and if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.